Hello, friends, and welcome back to r/ProRevenge. In the first story, we'll tell you what experience our OP had when a gang of bikers came to his store. But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you're new here and turn on notifications so you don't miss a new video every single day. Here we go. The day I learned a valuable lesson. This is a really old tale from me, back from one of my very first jobs, working at an ice cream shop. This was a quaint local place in a small suburb that you probably never heard of before. The store had just changed hands that summer, and the new owner and manager had never run a business before, but that's a tale for another day. I used to visit this ice cream place frequently over the summer, but I never fully grasped the clientele that visited until I worked there. I was in high school, about 16 years old, still young and naive. I'd only been working there for about a week. The day this story unfolded, I was working with one of my best friends, A. We had just opened, and it was probably about 10 a.m. It was a beautiful, warm Saturday morning. We were getting ready for what we expected to be a busy day. A was in the side room making an extra batch of waffle cones. It wasn't unusual for us to hear motorcycles cruise by, especially on these nice days in this suburb. What I wasn't expecting was for several of them to start stopping right in front of our ice cream store. Looking out our front window, I saw several big burly men and a woman there in what my mind could only describe as motorcycle gang outfits, many of them covered in tattoos. Over the next 10 minutes or so, about 30 to 40 of these individuals and their motorcycles were gathered out front of our store. I was terrified. I was pretty sure part of me thought we were about to be robbed or assaulted. In my mind, I was also thinking they'd scare away our actual customers if they didn't move on soon. But I was certainly not going to go out there and tell them that. One of the guys steps away from the group and comes inside. As he walked up to the counter, I noted he was at least a foot taller than me, probably about 220 pounds of mostly muscle wrapped in leather with a rather menacing snake tattooed around his bald head. Compared to my 5'4", 120 pounds, smock-wearing frame, I wasn't even sure I could outrun him. In fact, I was certain I couldn't. I tried to hide my terror, gave a meek smile, and asked how I could help him. "Can I get a single scoop of Superman on a kitty cone?" I paused. Blink. A quick glance outside told me that there were, in fact, no children in the group. The cone was for him. Instinctually, I answered, "Sure thing, coming right up." I tried to hide my confusion and surprise as I scooped the neon blue, red, and yellow ice cream into a sugar cone and handed it to him. By the time I had it ready, I was convinced this must be a joke of some kind, but I wasn't about to laugh at this guy. "$2.50, please." His face broke into a huge smile as I handed him the cone and he gave me his money. "Damn, this is some of the best ice cream around." And he left. All I could do was stare after him in surprise. The rest of the group slowly filtered in and ordered as well. A and I kept up as best we could, but occasionally couldn't help but giggle at some of the orders. The Superman ice cream, which typically only little kids order, was one of the more popular flavors, along with bubblegum. We later found out this was quite typical for them. The first Saturday of the month was always the largest group, but every Saturday morning around 10:30, about a dozen of them would show up for their weekly ride and ice cream. They were some of our best and most regular customers. And our second story. Parking by the door. Where I used to work, we had about 200 parking spots, about equal level of distance to the building. The building also had a fenced-in area where only official vehicles were allowed. This is where we kept our work trucks, boats, and other vessels that we worked on or got ready to deploy out into the field. About once a year, there'd be a giant conference where we'd get a few hundred out-of-townies to come through. On that week, we, the regular folk that work inside the building 365 days a year, would be allowed to park inside the fence. Most people would park right to left, closest to access gate along the building, and then away from the building along the fence line. Once we fill up these possible spaces, we'd start a second row behind that first row nearest the building. When I arrived on this day, they'd already started on the second row. I was lucky that I lined up right by the door behind one person. Considering that I might be a while before I returned to my vehicle that day, I leave a little extra space where a careful driver could angle out. About an hour later, I come back outside to find a note on my car. Please move vehicle. I have an appointment at 3:30. Mind you, this is at 8 in the morning. I go about my business and come back an hour later. New note. Please move vehicle. I have a medical appointment at 3:30. I laugh a little and go on my way. An hour or so later, 10 to 11 a.m. if you're keeping track, the note gets disrespectful. I've heard several times that you've been out here and it's mean to not move your vehicle when you clearly have someone who needs to leave for a medical emergency. So now it's a scheduled medical emergency? So I leave a note. It's 12:30, as I've had lunch and decided to leave a note back. If you don't want to be boxed in, don't park in front of the entrance where everybody wants to park. My supervisor calls me up. Hey man, name omitted is looking for you, but I didn't tell her who you were. She's a B, but I don't want to deal with her again. Take care of it. So I go move my car and replace it with one of the work boats and tell the team to start unloading it. I go off in the distance and see a woman come out and start yelling at my team. I stroll up and ask her what's wrong. She starts complaining about the truck, my vehicle, that was parked there before, and now there's a work boat blocking her. I tell her, well, maybe you should have parked against the far fence where there's little foot traffic and it isn't a known work zone. She leers at me and gets in her car and inches out. We all give her a wave goodbye. And our last story. My father abused and kicked me out of my home, so I took everything. I'm not going to drag this out too long, but to get right to the point, my father is very religious to the point we couldn't do a lot of things that would be considered normal. Christmas, dating, etc. I didn't hate my dad by any means. He taught me a lot. However, he was very abusive. He seemed to think the only way to discipline a child was to knock that sense into them. He would constantly get angry at minor things and punch my brother. I suppose we both just normalized that abuse, and as I got older, I learned not to take the punches and actually block. The first time I did it shocked my dad. It was so satisfying not to cry when my dad hit me and just look at him with this blank expression. Doing this definitely made him more angry as he would try to make me cry. I feel like it gave him some sick satisfaction. You'd think all of this would make me hate him. Nope, my idiotic self just didn't seem to register how bad this was. I tried to justify it as him teaching me a lesson, but eventually the last straw would come. So I was 16 at the time, and my father gave me this ultimatum: continue school or get a job and pay a majority of the bills. He wasn't working at the time, and I hated school. While my grades were average to high, I just didn't want to be a part of that environment anymore. Our overall bill was about £1,300, and I'd have to give £600 of my paycheck, with my brother paying the other half. I decided to just go with it and look for a job. Now, a week into my job search, my father started shouting at me, saying I was taking way too long. Keep in mind, when my brother left school, he gave him over 2 months to find something. He ended up putting me in front of a computer and made me apply to things all day and night. I ended up going to bed at 6 a.m. the next morning. I got so desperate, I applied for McDonald's, and within a day got the job. Unfortunately, it was one of the worst experiences of my life. A lot of inappropriate touching and horrible acquaintances. Anyway, a year into working, a new girl joined the team, and as cliche as it sounds, I fell for her instantly. I went out of my comfort zone and just decided to flirt with her. Within that day, we were dating. It was amazing. Obviously, I couldn't tell my dad about this, so we hid it for another year as we dated. My father later found out. Now, this part is pretty invasive, but he connected to my WhatsApp messages and was reading them on his laptop while I slept. I believe he actually opened my phone while I slept using my thumb recognition. I was chewed out the next day and told to break up with her, which I didn't, because she was a whore and didn't really love me. He then told me to get out of the house and never come back. I'll give some context for this. My dad likes to use this line when we're in trouble. He'll make us go outside our flat and then a minute later call us back inside. He'd never really gotten to that point with me, but my brother experienced it all the time. I'd always told him that if our father ever did that to me, I'd just leave. So as you can imagine, I left. I walked for hours while my dad was blowing up my phone to come home. If you thought this was because he cared or wanted me to be safe, you'd be wrong. He would later send texts telling me not to tell anyone what was happening. It's none of their business, and I'm not ruining his reputation. I wasn't planning on telling people anyway, but the fact he said that shows he only cares for others' opinions. Because I'd left so quickly, I hadn't had time to grab anything. I had a phone and the clothes on my back. I had to call my girlfriend for moral support, and after talking, she straight away booked a hotel. I was so thankful. Lucky for me, I was getting paid the next day, so I'd be able to get money and hopefully rent a place. To this day, I haven't spoken to my father, and I completely blocked him. And while I struggle to pay my rent every month, it's still way better than my situation prior. The story does have a happy ending. Remember how I wasn't able to get my stuff? Well, my father had gone on holiday. One of my friends tipped me to this. So my girlfriend and I went back to the house and broke in using a credit card. My dad never locked his door, so if you just swipe a card through the door with enough pressure, you could eventually make it turn and get in. I was actually struggling to do this until the neighbor came by and actually did it for me. He was such a good guy. I know he just assumed we were locked out, but he really saved my life more than he knows. I took everything I wanted, including stuff like the TV, since it was my money that paid for all that. I can only imagine how shocked my dad was when he came home and found all my stuff gone. He was probably going to sell it to cover the rent. Man, keep that girl. She stayed with you at your worst. You don't find that everywhere. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.